Hey guys, another great edition of Quarantine with Coaches. Today I got a special guest, a fellow St. Louisan. I always like to get the St. Louisans on there. But Coach Steward, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Good. Coach Steward is a running backs coach. Recently just got to Arizona and has had some previous spots. Why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of where you've been from your playing career now to your coaching career?
Yeah, so right after high school, went on to University of Kansas. That's where I played. Played redshirted, so I was there for 5 years. Once I got done playing, I really anticipated I graduated with health and PE, so anticipated just going back to St. Louis and being a high school coach. That was kind of my plan. And then maybe a month or so before graduation, I got a call from the OC down at Rice. He was an O-line coach at KU when I played. And he just asked me, he was actually calling to ask if I knew anybody who wanted to get into, a GA spot. And I hadn't even thought about it until that point. And so I was like, well, shoot, I was going to go coach some high school ball. I mean, if I'd definitely be interested, learn a little football and go back, and coach high school ball. And so I took that opportunity. It just literally fell in my lap and went down and worked with him. He's an O-line guy, John Reagan. But he was the running backs coach while he was the OC, and so I got there, and he was just like, "Hey, you're gonna work with me with the running backs." And so I went to college as a quarterback, and then I moved to kind of a big slot, and then ended up playing H-back before it was all said and done. And so I'm like, Reagan, this is like 7 different spots you could put me at. You put me at the one thing that it's going to be super uncomfortable. I'm not going to know anything, what to do. And so that's a funny story I tell everybody, but I worked with running backs with him, and then he ended up leaving after 2 years to take another job. And so I got elevated there at Rice. So I was at Rice for 6 years total, 2 as a GA and 4 as a full-time running backs coach. And then I transitioned over to BYU after Rice. I was there for 2 years, just up into this last season. And then, and so now I'm at Arizona. I've been here for a couple months. I've been quarantined longer than I've even been in the office. So at least I got enough gear for my locker before it all went out to be able to be, wearing a shirt right now. But yeah, that's kind of what's got me here. And that's been my trajectory of my career up to this point.
Yeah, and this is such an interesting situation for all the coaches across the country, but particularly I find it intriguing for guys like you who were sort of hired right before this thing went down, and here you are, trying to build relationships with your players, and now you're doing it virtually. What are some of the things you've been doing to build relationship with your guys who are, really trying to get to know you, but you guys can't meet in person?
Yeah, luckily, right before, I was there for 3 weeks in the building, and so I really got with those guys a handful of times individually as well as collectively, and just try to start ironing out and laying some foundation for good relationships with those guys. So I was blessed to at least have that amount of time to see them face to face, kind of, get a couple early conversations out of the way, looking eye to eye with them. And then, and now we're in this situation, I FaceTime those guys, text, we've had multiple discussions. And so more so than anything, that to me as a coach, that's the most important, especially coming into a situation like this. I'm just grateful that we have these tools, to be able to, at least bridge that gap, and be able to FaceTime a guy and kind of look at him while you're talking to him and things like that. And I think the players do appreciate that as well.
One thing I find interesting about coaching the running back position, I did it for 2 of my stops. It's managing the personalities, and
Yeah.
you get guys that were superstars in high school that were pounding the rock for 15, 20, 25 carries, and now that's a little bit different at the college level, right? You're trying to manage all those personalities. I think is maybe one of your hardest tasks. And how do you go about doing that?
For me, it's about setting ground rules and setting a standard in a culture in your room. That's something that really the last few years I've really focused on more so than anything else. I've been blessed to coach some good players, and so that helps. But it's kind of like you really want to be in the shoes of like a Phil Jackson when you're as a running backs coach. It's like you want to have this surplus of talent, but sometimes, as you know, like sometimes when you have multiple talented guys, it could be a headache. But it's like trying to get them to buy into the bigger picture, and that's kind of what I do. It's keeping them all humble and hungry daily, always kind of pinpointing things that they can continue to get better at, as well as loving them up and celebrating the little victories along the way. But I think just keeping them understanding that, hey, this is a physical sport, and especially as a running back, there's going to be a time we're going to need our third string guy to be a starting running back in this season or next season at some point. And so that's incentive for everybody to work hard every day to prepare, but also incentive for them to help the guy next to him rather than, hey, we're competing. And so, I'm going to have a bad attitude or, I'm going to be disgruntled and things like that. And so I try to just, create that atmosphere and help them understand that we're only as good as our group, as the whole, and not just one or two guys.
What's something you learned in that first year? You talked about Coach having 7 different places to put you in. He put you in a running backs room, and here you are now as a running backs coach. I want a Power 5 program. What's something you learned that year that you've taken with you now you're going to take with you to your first year at Arizona?
For me, it's just understanding that it's not as necessarily what it's getting your players to trust that what you're telling them is going to help them be most successful. I was insecure that first year when I went over. I didn't even want to say anything to the running backs because I was like, I don't know. First of all, I don't know what I'm talking about. For 2, I know they know I don't know what I'm talking about, and so it was very I was very insecure about it. And so, it forced me to learn, in those things. But with all that being said, the light bulb kind of went off in my coaching career when I kind of had some tangible things that I knew would resonate with the players, but also that when they hear me verbalize them, they believe it because I'm going to speak it with, in confidence, and I'm going to give them a why behind it, And so I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, going from a young guy who didn't know anything about the position to now. It's not. There's plenty of other better running back coaches than I am. But I think I do a good job at explaining the why behind my coaching, and my players just buy into it, and and they just play hard.
And you're still relatively young, and I think obviously we look at where you're at right now, great success so far in your career. What's something you would say, as far as advice, would you give to a younger coach who's trying to emulate your path?
I think just be where you are. I think I see a lot of guys, they're always looking at the next step. I think there's nothing wrong with having goals and aspirations to, take that next step in your career. But I think some guys get so fixated on that aspect instead of being everything that they can be in this, in the current position. And I think I tell people your difference is what gives you value. Don't try to be a 50-year-old, veteran coach when you're 25 years old. Bring something new to the table. They can go hire another 50-year-old guy that's been around the block. Bring something new, bring some new energy, bring, a new idea or a new way of doing things. And I think people will, they'll buy into that a little bit more than you just trying to fit the mold of kind of what you've seen, throughout your life as a player and as a coach. And so those are just a couple things. I think just being being all in that current role, master the current role that you're in. If you're quality control, be the best quality control that they've ever witnessed, or if you're just an analyst or whatever, just be the best that you can be in that. And then also trying to identify what makes me different, what makes me unique in regards to the position that I'm trying to be at, get to.
Awesome. Hey, before I let you go, we do a rapid fire here. You ready for that?
Yes.
Cool. What's the book that's had the biggest impact on you?
The biggest impact, I would say Sandcastle Kings by Rich Wilkerson. It's a Christian book, but what it does, it's really applicable to coaching as well. I think he talks a lot about planting seeds, and planting seeds of faith and positivity. And I think that's what I try to do as a coach. I try to plant positive seeds to my guys and teach them foundation of life through through the game of football. And so a lot of my coaching points, they're going to help them be football players, but I think they'll look back 10 years from now and be like, oh man, coach was like, he was subliminally dropping some knowledge and some bombs on me that I didn't really understand. You know, he talked about foundation all the time, as in regards to my technique. And so those are kind of some things that I took, from that book and just planting seeds daily and giving guys samples daily of positivity.
And we're going almost on 2 months of quarantine here. What's been the TV series, or maybe there's multiple now at this point, that you've kind of leaned on during this time?
Oh, man, there's been some really good ones. Last Dance, obviously, I think we've all watched it. Growing up in that that time, I caught like towards the back end, those last 3 championships. But it was just good to see kind of the stuff that happens behind the mask that we don't get to necessarily see, as viewers, especially back then. I mean, so that was something that was like just really cool for me to kind of go back in time and see him wearing all those shoes that I still keep buying to this day, and just remember when just the certain shoes came out and all that. I just begged my mom to get them, and it was kind of a good little trip down memory lane, but also like just kind of give you that sports fix that we're all craving right now, being on quarantine.
What's been your go-to quarantine meal?
My wife gets mad, but I eat turkey burgers almost like every day, just because it's like it's kind of healthy, but it's it's not like all on the total opposite end. She's like vegan and she's not eating meat and all that, and so I can't do that. And so I just I'll just eat turkey burgers. That's better than ordering Whataburger off DoorDash or something like that. So I eat turkey burgers like 2 or 3 times a week, and it makes my wife so mad.
So you're making some sacrifices.
Yeah, for sure.
So follow-up question that I had Coach Jones on from KU, your alma mater. Yeah. He had spent some time in Houston as well, and he was in KC. And now you have also been in St. Louis. You've been in those 2 places in St. Louis. And so I always got to ask, what's the best barbecue? What city's got the best barbecue?
So I don't know what Jones is, my boy, by the way. He's one of my best friends. But I'm going to go with Texas. I'm going to be real with you. What did he say? Do you remember?
I think he said Texas as well. Yeah.
Texas. I'm honestly not a huge barbecue fan. The only reason I say Texas, I don't really ever, when I'm in St. Louis, the only time I'll eat barbecue is if my family makes it. Like they make St. Louis style ribs and all that.
Right.
I definitely don't like KC. I'll just be honest with you. So that they're out of the running.
Here we go.
And so it's kind of by default, because in Texas you just have to eat their barbecue. And when you work for David Bailiff at Rice, I mean, he catered barbecue at least 3 times a week. I mean, that was his favorite deal. So it's kind of skewed in that perspective, from that perspective. But I'm gonna have to go with Texas, man.
Wow, turning your back on your hometown.
Hey, I didn't say pizza.
There we go. That leads us to the next couple of questions real fast here. St. Louis native, so I got to ask some staples there. What are you getting on your Emo's pizza?
I was just talking to a recruit the other day. When I go to Emo's, I only like getting one topping. I like getting Italian sausage, because I feel like when you get multiple toppings, the bread is too thin and it overwhelms the sauce and the cheese aspect. And so I just like going with straight one topping so I can really enjoy the sauce, cheese, and so I'm good with pepperoni too. I know a lot of people go bacon. Like I don't think you can go wrong with any one topping on it, in my opinion.
The bacon there is pretty crispy, I gotta admit. Yeah,
it's good.
Favorite St. Louis sports memory?
Favorite St. Louis it'd have to be the Mike Jones making that tackle at the 1-yard line. That's probably that. I mean, McGuire hitting 62. My mom let me stay up in elementary. I believe I was elementary, maybe middle school. She let me stay up to see it. Man, it was incredible. But I would definitely have to say Mike Jones. And I'm a little biased because Mike, I know him pretty well, and he coached against me when I was in high school as a player, and we've gotten to know each other now that he's a coach. And so I'm gonna go with Mike Jones on that one.
I like it. Last question. He was just on Instagram competing against Ludacris. You and I are around the same age. So if you're from St. Louis and you were going to high school in the early to mid 2000s, you had Nelly in the car. What's your go-to Nelly song?
It's got to be "Loving Me" off his first album. I'm going with that. I tell people all the time, he's had obviously these #1 hits, and he's has a great legacy, but I don't think you can be a true Nelly fan or from St. Louis if you don't know "Loving Me" by heart. That's a heartfelt song. He shouts out St. Louis, some things that you have to be from St. Louis to understand what he's talking about, some streets, parks, and stuff like that. And so that's just always kind of been my go-to. It's a sentimental song, and it always kind of takes me back to home when I listen to it.
Nothing better than that first Nelly album.
Most definitely.
I'm riding my bike with my CD player in my pocket around before the iPod.
For sure.
Awesome. Coach, I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on Quarantine with Coaches.
Most definitely. I appreciate you having me on, and respect and support what you do for sure.
Appreciate it.